Welcome, everyone, to the Firing the Man podcast. On today's episode, we are joined by Chris Odegard, the founder of The Prolific Investor, a company aimed at challenging conventional investment wisdom and advice. While today's episode is not necessarily geared specifically towards Amazon or e-commerce sales, Chris aims to provide practical advice that, if followed, can lead to a life of financial freedom and prosperity, which is a goal I think we all have in common. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thanks for having me on. I'm really happy to be here. It's going to be fun.
Absolutely. So first things first, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I grew up in the Midwest, suburbs of Cincinnati, Ohio, as a conventional, in a middle-class family, conventional thinking, and I went down to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, Florida, to get my education in the field that I love, aviation, and I moved out to Seattle, and I worked for the Boeing company for 33 and a half years. And like I said, I grew up knowing what my parents knew was to get a job with benefits, put your money in a 401k, and someday off in the distant future, maybe in your 60s, you'd be financially free and able to retire. I had a great career, but something happened to me in my mid 40s. I had what I fondly refer to as illiquidity event, which in my case was a divorce where I lost 55% of my assets and thousands of dollars a month in income. And so the conventional plan wasn't going to work if I was, with that loss. And that's when a friend of mine had recommended a book to me that sat on my nightstand for longer than I cared to admit, and it was Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And it just sat there, and I was on a business trip on an airplane. I said, I got time, I'm going to finish this book. I start the book and finish it, and I did. And that just turned me on to this whole new world of alternative investments, which includes real estate and a lot of other things. And in 9 short years, I had made up all of that 55% loss, and I fired the man. And way earlier than the original plan, back when I was doing everything conventionally. And so about a year before I fired the man, I started writing this blog, and I thought, what, Americans and even other people around the world, the financial system is just stacked against them, and there are so many benefits to being outside of that system, outside of 401ks and the stock market, and doing other things, but nobody talks about it. So I started the blog, and I said, well, I want to help other people, get to that financial independence place faster. And there's nothing wrong with working, but I always say you want to get to a place where you can make work a choice instead of a necessity, and where what you do every day is what makes you happy and fulfills you, and not because you got to do it to pay the bills. So that's kind of that's the short story.
Well, very nice. And before we dive a little deeper on alternative investments and more about The Prolific Investor, I have to ask you now, both Ken and I love the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And we actually have done an entire episode about that. Now, I got to ask, how long after you read that book did you purchase your first rental property? Mine is 3 months. And I'm curious about that.
You probably got me beat. It was within 24 months. It was within 24 months. And there's a little bit of if I can indulge, a little bit of a funny story. So I had read that book, and there was kind of a call to action at the last chapter. And I don't know if you've ever seen the Saturday Night Live episode with Chris Farley, where he's the motivational speaker living in a van down by the river. Well, I was living in a van down by the river, sort of, in terms of this really dumpy apartment after my illiquidity event. And an advertisement came on the radio for Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Company, and they were doing a local seminar on real estate. And so I said, well, I'm going. The day that I was to go to that, my 92 F-150, which I still drive, which is parked right out here, wouldn't start. I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to go to this. I found a rental car company that would drop off a car to my house, and I went to that seminar, and that was, just the first of many classes on real estate and investment. So yeah, but you've gotten the beat with the 3-month thing. That's awesome.
Very cool. Yeah. I think the illiquidity event that you speak of is pretty common. I think that there's probably a lot of listeners that have had that experience or have heard of that. Interesting. So. My background, Chris, is in network engineering, and So that's kind of my, my space. And so investing is, sometimes it's overwhelming. And not just me, but for a lot of people. So for those that are not financially savvy or do not have a background in investing, why should they care about investing?
Well, kind of like I said before, I mean, there's nothing wrong with work, and we've got to do it. But it's someday, no matter how much you like your job, you probably want to call it quits someday, or you just want to do something different. You've got this job and you're making however many, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year you're making, but at some point in time, say, I would rather be doing this over here, and this doesn't pay much money or any money, but that's where my passion really lies, and I just want to do that. So, we all have to, we all have to spend, I think, a certain amount of our efforts toward investing so we can, get to that point. I wish I could remember where I heard this, but somebody once said, you need 3 hobbies. One that exercises your creativity, one that keeps you physically fit, and one that makes you money. So, and I always thought that was a really good thing. And so we should all be spending a little bit of time working on how we're not going to work anymore. And unfortunately, if you just give your money to, the 401k administrator, think you're going to get there, you may get there, but it'll take a long time, and the quality of life, at least financially, will be less. And there's better ways to go about it.
Chris, I'd like to dive a little bit more into 401k plans. And, when I first joined the workforce, it was like standard, right? You start your 401k plan. If your company makes contributions, great. If they match, great. But it was just kind of this blanket advice. And the thing that makes me nervous about that is you pay into these things over your lifetime. And then when you're retired, hopefully things work out. But you do not really get a do-over. And so what are your thoughts on 401k plans, and what would be your advice to people, to be on the lookout for?
First of all, they're terrible. Don't put your money in them. There is a place for the Roth, but I would say, and this is the way I like to answer this question, if I could go back, 30, 40 years, knowing what I know now, I would have never put a dime in a 401k. So think about the why people invest in 401ks. Number one, you supposedly you get these tax benefits, right? In terms of deferring your income into the future. Number two, you get this company match, right? And I have, and I don't know how you guys want to approach this. I have put together the graphic on this because one day I said, well, let me do the math and compare. Intuitively in my mind, I know, or at least I thought I knew, that buying a single-family rental was a better investment than a 401k. And I've done the math on that. So think about this. So again, the two things, taxes and the company match, those are kind of the big deal. So, well, when you buy a single-family rental, you get a match also. And it's called other people's money, and the fact that the tenant is paying off the principal of your mortgage over 30 years. And that is better than the average 4% match that comes from the company match across the country. So you're getting, I call it an other people's money benefit. With a 401k, your employer makes a contribution. When you have a rental property, the tenant makes the contribution, and the tenant contribution is worth more than the average employer match. And then the second thing is you get the supposed tax benefit with the 401k. And that's where you don't pay money, you don't pay taxes now, but you defer them into the future where supposedly you're going to be in a lower tax bracket. Well, if you had instead of putting that money in the 401k and deferred the taxes in the future, if you had invested it even in the same things, mutual funds, in a Fidelity account or a Charles Schwab, when you took that money out 30 years later, under today's tax laws, it'd be taxed at 15% long-term capital gains rate. When you put it into the 401k, when it comes out as ordinary income, taxed at the highest rate, just like you were working. So you've taken money that you could have changed to 15% tax bracket and maintained it at the highest tax bracket. And you only get that tax benefit when you make the contribution. So you make a contribution to your 401k, and that contribution that year is deferred. When you make an investment into single-family rental, you get a tax benefit every year for 26 and a half years. It's called, you get to depreciate the property, and that tax benefit is worth more than a 401k. So a 401k wins hands down. And let's say you made a $30,000 in a year, you made a $30,000 contribution to your 401k plan. You buy $30,000 worth of stuff. If you took $30,000 as a down payment on a house, you would buy $100,000 worth of stuff, and you would get all the benefits of owning that $100,000 asset, including the $70,000 that the bank put in. So that's those are my thoughts on that. Hopefully that made some sense.
Yeah, that was a really good analogy. I've never heard it described like that, but it makes sense. Yeah. So getting into taxes a little bit more, there's a saying that Benjamin Franklin has: "Nothing is certain but death and taxes." Do you think that's true? You kind of alluded to some tax benefits here in real estate. Maybe can you dive deeper in there and pull the curtain back on that?
Yeah. Well, it's only half true. So today at least everybody's going to die someday. But the fact that the taxes are for certain is not true. In 2019, I paid 0 federal income taxes, and we've heard if you listen to anything Robert Kiyosaki says on his podcasts or his interviews or read his books, he talks about paying little or no taxes, being in the I quadrant as an investor. And I can now say that little old me, I have done that. In 2019, I paid no taxes. As a matter of fact, I did 2 blogs on the topic. One was where I talked about kind of how I did it. And then I kind of overachieved. I'm trying to took a $100,000 401k distribution purposely, because I know that the benefits of that, the tax benefits are better outside than inside. So I created a $100,000 taxable event. And so I wanted to eliminate that. So I did by making a particular energy investment, but I overachieved and not only wiped out that, but all of my ordinary income. And so I talked about that, and then I was really kind of torn about whether to talk about the fact I didn't pay any taxes, because some people are going, well, that's un-American, and everybody's got to pay your fair share. When and this is not a political comment, it doesn't matter who the president was at the time, but there was a lot of press about Trump, about the fact that he paid $750 in taxes. Well, I say he was an underachiever because I paid 0. So, but the point was, everybody. The press things were like, oh, there's 2 tax systems, one for the rich and one for the poor. No, there's 2 tax systems, one for those who are educated and those who are uneducated. I don't have an army of attorneys or CPAs. I do have a CPA. And, I was able to do this because, I just make it my point to, take full advantage of the tax code. And when you think about it, about 90+% of the tax code is telling you how to pay less taxes. It's just the government saying, hey, if you want to do business with me and do things that the government thinks are good for the economy, do these things and we will reward you. So I choose to do those things. The rest of the people that don't, I'm sorry, but they're making a choice to pay more taxes.
As we're talking about taxes and real estate, I forget where this was. I was at a presentation somewhere, and someone said, why do people in real estate pay so little taxes? Mm-hmm. And this was a very simple answer, but years later, I still remember it. The person said, there are 2 occupations that the government really favors. One is farmers, because they provide food. And 2 is people that invest in real estate because it provides shelter, right? Food and shelter, that's like the bare necessities for our country to prosper, right? And, and so that really stuck with me. And, I come from Iowa, from a farming community, and boy, is that true on the farming side of things. And,
right.
As a real estate investor, I've found the same to be true. And so I really like your comments about taxes. Now, we connected a couple months ago, and since then I've become a pretty big fan of your blog, and wanted to dive into, I hope you don't mind repeating this, but you have a very good negotiation story when you were the director of contracts at Boeing. You mind if we get into that?
You must have heard that somewhere else, because that's not. I don't think that's on my blog, but I'm happy.
Well, I've listened to a lot. Listen, Chris, I'm a fan. I am a fan. I've heard it somewhere, but boy, would I love you to tell that story on this podcast.
Okay, sure. So I did a lot of things at the Boeing company over 33 and a half years, and it was a it's really, I think in anybody's kind of corporate career, if you had one, there were ups and downs, and sometimes the down part is kind of towards the end, and I don't know whether that's being older or the job just changed. But anyway, when I look on the career as a whole, it was a great career, and the contracts portion of it was certainly the highlight. So let's go back to the days before the first 787 ever rolled out of the factory, and it was the coolest thing since sliced bread. And it was to use a real estate term, it was a seller's market. We couldn't sell enough of these planes fast enough, and I was at Boeing. The selling team consisted of the contracts director and the sales director and the marketing director, and I was the contracts guy. I wrote the contracts, negotiated the details, signed the deal. And the three of us were over in I'll just say an island, Pacific island nation, in the national airline there, and I believe they were buying 3 or 5 787s, and we had been to this place, a number, and it was a really nice place to go to. We had been there a number of times, and we went back to just kind of ink the deal, and it was supposed to be all over. And we showed up on a Monday, and me and the sales director, and we've got the CEO and a handful of his staff there, and they kind of start just renegotiating, and they had this long laundry list of stuff, and I was just kind of shocked. And I said, we came here to finish this deal, not to renegotiate it. I said, look, we're going to go back to the hotel, and we're out of here on Friday, one way or the other, and we'll let you know. And so the sales director and I went back to the hotel. We sat at the nice pool for a few days, and we said, okay, it was kind of ridiculous that they were doing this, but we said, okay, let's take a look at this list of things and figure out for the sale and the relationship, what is it that we can do here? So we showed back up on a Friday, a few hours before we were supposedly leaving. I don't remember exactly if we were or not, but that was the story we gave. And I sat across the table from these guys, and contracts are still done the old-fashioned way. I mean, an airplane contract is big, 3 reading binder, this big, I kid you not, there's probably 50 signatures, and we would do duplicates, and I had these binders in front of me, and I said, okay, I'm going to go through your list, and anything I don't mention, we're not doing anything. And I said, okay, number 4. He says, number 1, 2, and 3. I said, look, anything that I don't mention, we're not doing it. So I went through the list of things, and I addressed a handful of things that I thought were appropriate. And I took these 2 binders and I pushed them off the table, and I said, that's the deal. It's good until we leave the room. And he said, well, no pressure. I said, well, this is the way it is. And he said, if you wouldn't mind going into the room next door for a little while. So me and the sales guy went next door, and for 30 or 45 minutes, and we came back in, and he said a few words. He said, well, if you want to give me a signing pen, I'll start signing. And so we started signing these things, and while we were doing it, he said to one of his vice presidents, he said, hey, remember when Airbus was here and they gave us that bottle of champagne to sign or to drink when we were signing the contract? We're signing the contract, so let's drink their champagne. So it was a very nice, multiple $100 bottle of customized Airbus champagne for the A350, the competitor to the 787. So it was a pretty sweet deal. We drank Airbus's champagne while we were sitting there signing the Boeing contract for the 787. So, that's one of my favorite stories. You don't get too many, times where you can say, take it or leave it. Like I said, it was a seller's market in those days. It's very different now, of course. But anyway, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I like that. I like that story. That's That's real. Yeah, that's gutsy. That's hard nosed, and yeah, it sounds like it made it even sweeter to drink that Airbus while you're inking that deal. That's top shelf there. So, Chris, I want to switch directions a little bit. Can you explain to the audience, what the hierarchy of investors is, and why did you create it?
So, as I after I started my blog, a little bit before I fired the man, I'm going to keep throwing that in there. That's why I fired the man. I hate the word retirement. I'm going to use your guys' term. I fired the man. So,
Yeah.
So people would ask me, well, what's the purpose of your blog, Chris? What are you trying to do? And you guys already touched about it when you said, food and shelter. I started to think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And, with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you've got food, shelter, safety, security, self-actualization at the top. So I view conventional investments and investors, which is pretty much everything that's publicly traded, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs. Those are conventional investments. Those are not even on the pyramid, or I use pyramid and hierarchy interchangeable. They're like in the shadow of the pyramid, in the dark, And then on the hierarchy or pyramid, all these various alternative investments, things like real estate, cryptocurrency, business machines, energy, cash value, life insurance, and as you move, everything is better on the pyramid. So I compare conventional investments and alternative investments across 13 different categories, and in 11 of the 13, alternatives have the advantage. One of them is neutral, and conventional investments, their only advantage is liquidity, meaning you can convert your investment into cash instantly. But the downside, or the ugly stepchild of liquidity, is volatility. That's what the ability for millions of people to sell something instantly is what drives the prices up and down. So, my apartment buildings and other type of real estate investments, the values, they don't go like this, right? Because they can't be sold instantly. So anyway, the hierarchy of investors is just is the visual that I created to explain why people need to get out of the shadow and move up onto the pyramid or the hierarchy.
Very nice. And we're going to post that in the show notes, a link to that, because it is a really good visual. Now, Chris, I understand you have a book coming out. Can you go into that at all?
Yeah. It's called, hopefully won't need the editor on this. It's called Get Off Your Ass and Manage Your Money, Why You Need Alternative Investments, and $. And I'm just so passionate about this. And so it's really walking people through the hierarchy of investors. And not only that, but kind of right back to the beginning, there are four main asset classes: paper, which is stocks, bonds, and mutual funds; real assets, things like real estate, business equipment; commodities, oil, gas, grains, beef, things like that; and then businesses, private shares of smaller businesses. And so when you hand your money over to a financial advisor and they build you a diversified portfolio of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, you're only in one of the asset classes. So yeah, you're diversified within a fraction of the marketplace. And then and alternatives spread all across all of those assets. So anyway, it's just kind of an educational process that starts there and walks you through the hierarchy of investments and why different things are better. And I use one particular alternative investment as an example throughout the whole thing. So I will say, okay, well, here's why alternatives are better over conventional investments in terms of return on your investments. And then I'll talk generally about what the S&P 500 has done over its inception since about 1926. And then I'll use one of my alternatives, which, believe it or not, is ATM machines. And the reason I use the ATM machines is because they're very simple. The math is very simple and consistent. So that's the reason I use it. And at the end of the day, I'm like, okay, here it is. And it's been through one draft with the editor, and I realized I needed a call to action. So if I did my job correctly, you're like, oh my gosh, I need to be in alternative investments. How do I get started? So that's the final chapter that I had to add, and it's coming. But I've just moved from Seattle to South Carolina, so things are trying to find a place to live. So the book will be out sometime this year for sure.
No, that's great. I'll be waiting for it. I'll grab a copy and check it out for sure. So Chris, you alluded to earlier that, the like your analogy of like a 401k saving for retirement versus a rental property. So do you recommend basically for someone in their, 20s, 30s saving for retirement long term, would you recommend not putting money into a 401k and just taking that same money and then if they choose to work throughout their career, just buying rentals and then having that income in retirement? Is that what you recommend?
Unequivocally, that's what I would have not, I followed the conventional wisdom, and it worked relatively well for me, but I can tell you that I left millions of dollars on the table, by starting in my early 20s at a job and just putting all this money in a 401k. I actually have a lot of young people that talk to me and follow me, and that's exactly the way I answer the question. They say, well, what would you do? So I have to say, look, I'm not a financial advisor. I can't give investment or tax advice, but knowing what I know now, if I was your age with this brain, I would have never put any money into that 401k. I would have started acquiring single family rentals and you could do that. It's a little bit like the Monopoly game, the little houses and then the hotels, and you just kind of keep building it. And the advantages they're just overwhelming. Matter of fact, let me pull out a number. Let me pull out a number here from that. Oh yeah, so first year return on a if you said, okay, I'm going to put $30,000 into my 401k and assume like an 8% return with a 4% employer match. Because of the employer match in the first year, you get about a 36% return. But let's say I don't put anything in the second year, then you just drop down to about your 8% return. Single family rental, you put your $30,000 in, that's the down payment on a loan, and you get 3% appreciation, a minimal cash flow of like $100 a month. You get the depreciation. You're not getting 36% the first year, you're getting 45% the first year. And the second year, when you got only 8% on your 401k, you're getting 28% on the real estate because you continue to get the other people's money in terms of you're getting the tenant paying your mortgage even when you're not making another investment, and you're getting depreciation even when you're not making an investment. So the numbers are huge. They're overwhelming. Matter of fact, but there have been studies done, and the average investor, because of the way they move money in and out of the market, they only get about 5%. That's before taxes and inflation. So, the average stock investor is not even keeping up with inflation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I have a kind of a curveball question here. It just kind of came to me. So let's say there's someone that's in their 30s, 40s. They got into the trap of investing into a 401k, and now it's like, okay, let's say they have $100,000 in a 401k. Do you think it would be a good time to pivot and then extract money out of that 401k and go into real estate? What do the numbers look like over, say, a 20-year period of doing that?
I would say it's always a good idea to pivot because the benefits are so overwhelming. And the thing that people shouldn't do is beat themselves up about things that they didn't know or they didn't learn. We all learn what we learn when we learn it because of our family situation or, the people that we hung around with. So yeah, pivot. And the interesting thing about 401ks is that most people think that you can only invest your 401k money in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. That's only because the big 401k administrators, that's all they let you invest in. There's only about a handful of things that the IRS says you can't invest your 401k money. So if you get the right administrator, if you can take your money from this administrator here and put it over here. You could take 401k money and buy real estate with it, but you got to get the right plan. You probably heard of self-direct. You have IRAs, and you might have heard of a self-directed IRA. That's where you take your IRA money and you put it into with a self-directed custodian, where you can invest that money in anything, including real estate or cryptocurrency or whatever. But, I did it in 2019. I took a $100,000 distribution because I knew it was better and found a way to not do taxes. But you really got to do your homework before you do that, because you don't want to pay those penalties and taxes. Yeah, you'd pay, if you couldn't do it, you'd pay not only the taxes, but you'd pay penalties if you do it wrong.
Sure.
So,
yeah,
Chris, I've got a follow-up question to that. So there is probably someone listening right now and that has money in a 401k. They like the idea of rolling it into something like a self-directed IRA. You had mentioned do your homework. What would be step one for them? Do they need to talk to their employer? Do they need to talk to their current 401k plan administrator? What would they need to do to put the ball in motion?
Yeah, if they're still working, and the key is the term in-service transfer. That's the key. You call up, whoever the plan administrator is for your employer. Say, can I do an in-service transfer? And in my case, this is not the distribution that I did in 2019, but prior to that, and this is kind of a good story too. When I first got into alternatives, I was part of an investment group, just a networking group, and I had the exact problem you're talking about. I'd been an employee for a lot of years, and a lot of my money was tied up in a 401k, and there wasn't a whole lot extra outside, especially after that illiquidity event, to go invest in real estate. And this guy said to me, he said, Chris, call your company plan administrator and ask them if you can do an in-service transfer. And I said, well, what's an in-service transfer? He said, well, that's where they will let you take some of your money and transfer it to, an outside administrator while you're still working. And I don't think I laughed out loud, but I had worked at the Boeing company for decades. By this time, I was like, look, if that were possible, certainly I would have heard about it, right? Well, I was wrong. I was dead wrong, and I called, and they said, yeah, we will let you take out or transfer all of the company's contributions, which after a few decades of working was not an insignificant amount of money. And I used that to fund some of my first alternative investments. So that's the key, in-service transfer. You got to find out what the current administrator will let you do. Okay,
very nice. So you have a mentoring program. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So on my website, it's kind of evolved. I have a thing that says, hey, schedule a free 30-minute virtual coffee with Chris. And then there's this kind of awkward silence at the end of those conversations. Well, what's next, Chris? What if I want to have these conversations more often and have you help me do this? So I created a program, and I thought, well, my journey was like a lot of people, it was 1 step forward, 5 steps back, 6 steps to the left, 8 steps to the right, another half step forward. And I went, you know what? I know how to draw the straight line on this path now because I've done it. And I could take somebody through an educational process that would show them why this path is better and introduce them to all the right resources and the right people and the right groups. And then at the end of this, and maybe this takes a year, could be an alternative investor and an educated one. And so basically it's a process, and it involves homework on their part. And then we have, depending on which price level they want to choose, I have regular video conversations with them, because everybody can read books and listen to podcasts, but it's this, okay, well, I read this and I heard this, but I didn't quite get it. Can we go into a little bit more detail about that? So that's kind of what that's all about. And what's interesting is, it's a good thing, and it's kind of a hard to understand thing, that the people who are most open to this are young people. I mean, I'm talking about kids that are still in college, and most people are under 30. my job when I was sitting around, 3 or 4 other guys that were all my age, and they watched me climb out of this illiquidity event and doing what I'm doing. Do you think any of them ever looked at what I was doing and said, wow, maybe I should try that? 99% of the people don't. But that, I guess it's this, 50-year-old mindset, but the young people are snatching this stuff up. And I'm like, you're going to be so much farther ahead of the game by doing things differently. So it's really rewarding to have these conversations with these young people.
Yeah, that's great. I think there's something to be said about mentoring programs and kind of skipping the line. You can kind of pay to get ahead, and I've used that in my business career. So yeah, definitely a very valuable program to find someone that's been there and ask them how they got there. Right. So really cool. So Chris, on the podcast we have. Before we wrap up, David, did you have any follow-up questions?
I don't. This has been wonderful. We're going to post links to a whole lot down in the show notes on the Prolific Investor website. You've got a lot of great graphics, and really looking forward to your book. So be sure to, when that goes on sale, send me an email. And
there's a little star on the homepage that says, pre-order. So if you go in there and click on that, you can put your name, and you'll be one of the first people that you'll be the second person that knows right after me. So,
all right,
awesome,
perfect.
So, Chris, we have a fire round that we do for every guest. Are you ready?
I'm so ready. Yeah, let's do it.
All right. What is your favorite book?
I have a hard time picking favorites, so I'm gonna break the rules and do 3. Rich Dad Poor Dad is one. The other one is Tax Free Wealth by Tom Wheelwright. And the third one is 401 Chaos by Andy Tanner. So, and I say favorite, those books have really changed my mind and taught me how to look at things differently.
Excellent. Yeah, I have not heard of that third one. I've read the first 2, but I'm gonna check out that third one. Very cool. What are your hobbies?
My hobbies, I like things with motors, so motorcycles, Corvettes, and I like driving them all across the country. That's one of them. Behind investing, which I just really get a kick out of finding, the next deal, and beyond that, I'm a barbershop a cappella singer, so I have sang in barbershop choruses and quartets. As a matter of fact, I just moved down here to Somerville, South Carolina, and I'll be looking for a new barbershop group to join to start singing.
That's awesome. Yeah, very cool. Very diverse. Lots of diverse hobbies. Very cool. Okay, what do you think sets apart successful entrepreneurs from those who give up, fail, or never get started?
I think you have to have a goal that's bigger than money, because when the money doesn't come fast enough or it gets too hard, people will give up and quit if that's what you're looking for. So, even just doing what I'm doing, if I and money was not the primary motivator, it was just to help and educate people. But if it had been, I would have given up and quit a long time ago, because this has been I don't know anything about doing this kind of stuff, and I'm learning as I go along, and it's costing me money to do it. So you got to have a goal that's bigger than the dollar.
Yeah, excellent advice. Excellent advice. Yeah. Pre-revenue ventures are tough, right? So, Chris, really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. How can people get a hold of you?
Everything about me you can find at theprolificinvestor.net, and there's kind of a 3-step process to interact with me. There's a conventional wisdom quiz. It's a 10-question quiz. You can take that. It'll email you what your answer was and what my answer was, and if there's a difference, why they were different. And then you can schedule a 30-minute free virtual coffee with me. And after that, if you're interested in the mentoring program, that's there. And of course, you can sign up to be the first to get notified when the book comes out. But everything on all the social media channels, YouTube, everything that's a one-stop shop.
Excellent. Well, we really appreciate you coming on the show, and look forward to staying in touch. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah,
perfect.
Appreciate it, Chris.